You finally won. The deal closed, the argument ended, the obstacle fell away, and in that single breath of relief, you exhaled everything you had been holding. Your tension, your focus, your guard. It felt earned, it felt safe. But what you didn't realize is that this exact moment, this exhale, this tiny window of release, is precisely where you were most vulnerable. The samurai understood something that modern man has forgotten. Victory is not the end of danger. It is the beginning of a new kind of threat. And if you do not understand what comes after the strike lands, everything you fought for can be taken from you in an instant. Chapter 1. The Second Strike. In feudal Japan, sword masters trained their students to execute perfect cuts. The angle of the blade, the rotation of the hips, the explosive commitment of the entire body moving as one. But the greatest teachers knew that the cut itself was not where battles were lost. Battles were lost in the moment after. They called this principle Zanshin, a word that translates roughly to remaining mind or continuing spirit. It refers to the state of total awareness that must be maintained even after an action is complete, especially after an action is complete. The sword has struck, the opponent staggers, and yet the warrior does not relax. His eyes remain fixed, his posture stays rooted, his breath does not scatter, because he understands something that lesser men do not. The body that falls may rise again, and the threat that seems finished may only be pausing. There is a famous account involving the sword saint Yagyu Munenori, who served as instructor to 3 successive shoguns. He once observed 2 students sparring. One executed a clean strike and immediately dropped his stance, assuming the exchange was over. Munenori stopped the session and addressed not the student who had been struck, but the one who had delivered the blow. He said something that would be passed down for generations. "You won the technique, but you lost yourself. A dead man can still kill you if you turn away too soon." This was not metaphor. In actual combat, a mortally wounded opponent could still deliver a fatal counterstrike in their final seconds. Samurai knew that men do not always fall when they should. Adrenaline, rage, and desperation can carry a dying body further than logic would permit. And so, the principle of Zanshin was drilled into warriors not as philosophy, but as survival. You were to remain fully present, mind, body, and spirit, until the threat was completely and undeniably finished. Not when you believed it was finished. When it actually was. Chapter 2. The exhale that destroys. Now consider how you live. Think of the last time you achieved something meaningful. A project completed, a conflict resolved, a goal finally reached. What happened in the minutes and hours that followed? If you are honest, you will recognize the pattern. There was a release, a softening, a quiet voice that whispered, "It's over. You can rest now." And in that exhale, something shifted. Not externally, internally. Your discipline loosened, your standards quietly lowered. The intensity that had carried you forward simply evaporated, because you believed the danger had passed. This is the moment where most men fail, not in the struggle itself, but in the breath that follows. You closed the deal, then neglected the client relationship. You finished the project, then let the momentum dissolve into weeks of passivity. You won the argument with your partner, then assumed the underlying tension had been resolved when it had only gone silent. You achieved the physical goal, then slowly returned to the habits that had made you weak in the first place. This is not laziness in the way that most people understand it. It is something more subtle and more dangerous. It is the death of Zanshin. It is the abandonment of the remaining mind, precisely when the remaining mind is needed most. The samurai would have recognized this immediately. They would have called it a fatal error, not because the consequences are always immediate, but because the pattern guarantees eventual collapse. When you release your awareness the moment pressure lifts, you are not celebrating your victory. You are planting the seeds of your next defeat. The opponents of your life, distraction, complacency, entropy, old patterns, do not announce themselves. They do not wait for you to be ready. They move in the pause. They strike in the exhale. And by the time you recognize what has happened, you are already falling. Chapter 3. The Student and the Mountain. There is a story passed through Zen monasteries of a young student who climbed a mountain to study with an aging master. The journey took several days. The terrain was unforgiving. Loose rock, narrow paths, sudden storms. By the time the student reached the summit, his legs were trembling and his spirit was worn thin. He collapsed at the gate of the monastery, relieved beyond words. He had made it. The master came outside and looked at the student lying in the dirt. Without greeting or congratulations, he asked a single question. "How will you descend?" The student, confused, replied that he had not thought about the descent. He had been entirely focused on arriving. The master nodded slowly and said, "Then you are not yet ready to be here." This story illustrates the essence of Zanshin in a context beyond combat. The student believed the challenge ended when he reached the destination. But the master understood that arrival is not completion. It is transition. The mountain does not become safe simply because you have stopped climbing. Gravity remains, weather remains, the narrow paths and loose rocks remain. To reach the summit and abandon awareness is to guarantee a dangerous fall. And so, the master's lesson was clear. Your alertness must continue beyond the point where your goal is achieved. The remaining mind is not a temporary state for moments of crisis. It is a permanent orientation toward reality. Now place yourself in this story. You are the student, and the mountains you climb are the challenges of your life. Your ambitions, your transformations, your battles against your own weakness. When you reach a summit, when you finally accomplish what you set out to do, what happens to your awareness? Do you maintain the discipline that carried you upward? Or do you collapse at the gate, relieved, and assume the danger has passed? If you answer honestly, you will see the pattern that has undermined you again and again. You relax into your victories. You exhale your intensity. You release the very focus that made you capable of climbing in the first place. And then, slowly or suddenly, you find yourself falling. Chapter 4. The War After the War. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman who survived over 60 duels without defeat, wrote extensively about the continuity of awareness in his treatise, The Book of Five Rings. He emphasized that a warrior must never allow his spirit to become fixed or stagnant, must never assume a single moment represents final safety. Musashi understood that battles unfold in layers. There is the external battle, the opponent before you, the obstacle in your path. But there is also the internal battle, which is far more enduring and far more dangerous. The internal battle is against your own tendency to relax, to become comfortable, to believe that discipline is a temporary requirement, rather than a permanent structure. This is the war after the war. It is the conflict that continues even when no enemy is visible. And Musashi knew that most men lose the second war, not through weakness, but through ignorance. They simply do not understand that it exists. They assume that defeating the external opponent is enough. They assume that crossing the finish line means the race is over. But the samurai who survived were those who recognized the truth. There is no finish line. There is only the continuation of attention. There is only the remaining mind. In practical terms, this means your job is never complete. Your transformation is never finished. Your vigilance is never no longer required. This is not a pessimistic view. It is a realistic one. It does not demand that you live in anxiety or exhaustion. It simply asks that you maintain the inner posture of readiness, even when circumstances appear calm. The samurai standing in a peaceful garden was no less alert than the samurai standing on a battlefield. The context changed, but the mind did not. This is the practice of Zanshin extended into daily life. It is the discipline of refusing to abandon yourself in comfort. Chapter 5. The 3 collapses. There are 3 primary ways that men collapse after victory. Understanding them will help you recognize the pattern in your own life and interrupt it before it destroys what you have built. The first collapse is physical. This is the most obvious form. You achieve a goal, and your body responds by seeking rest, pleasure, and release. There is nothing inherently wrong with rest. But rest is not collapse. Rest is a conscious recovery with the intention of returning to discipline. Collapse is abandonment. It is the body seeking comfort without limit, slowly reversing the very progress that was made. You got in shape, and then you stopped training. You completed the project, and then you stopped creating. You built something meaningful, and then you let it decay through neglect. This is physical collapse. The body reclaiming its laziness the moment your will looks away. The second collapse is mental. This occurs when you stop thinking with the same sharpness that carried you through difficulty. Your mind becomes loose, your standards lower. You begin to tolerate things you once refused to accept. You tell yourself you have earned the right to relax your attention. And in doing so, you invite back every distraction, every destructive pattern, every excuse that you had previously overcome. Mental collapse is subtle because it disguises itself as reward. It feels like freedom, but it is not freedom. It is the unlocking of a gate that should have remained closed. The third collapse is spiritual. This is the deepest and most dangerous form. It occurs when you lose connection to the purpose that originally drove you. In the struggle, your reason for fighting was clear. It fueled you, focused you, gave weight to your suffering. But in victory, that purpose can quietly dissolve. You achieved the goal, so the goal no longer pulls you forward, and without that pull, you drift. Spiritual collapse is what happens when a man wins the battle but forgets why he was fighting. He becomes hollow. His victories feel meaningless. He may appear successful to others, but inside, he is lost. These 3 collapses often occur together, each one feeding the others, and they all stem from the same root cause, the abandonment of Zanshin. The moment you exhale your focus, all 3 vulnerabilities awaken. The only protection is to maintain the remaining mind, not through fear, but through understanding. You stay alert because you know what happens when you don't. You continue your discipline because you have seen where its absence leads. Chapter 6. The Practice of Continuation. So how does one cultivate Zanshin in a world that constantly rewards collapse? The first step is to redefine your understanding of completion. Nothing is complete in the way that you have been taught. Every ending is a transition. Every finish line is a doorway. When you achieve something, do not ask, "What can I stop doing now?" Ask instead, "What must I continue doing to protect what I have built?" This shift in questioning will restructure your behavior automatically. You will stop seeking release and start seeking maintenance. You will stop viewing discipline as a burden to be dropped and start viewing it as a structure to be sustained. The second step is to build non-negotiables into your life. Actions that do not depend on circumstances, mood, or success. These are your anchors. They remain fixed whether you are struggling or thriving, whether you are climbing the mountain or standing at its peak. Perhaps it is a morning practice of silence. Perhaps it is physical training that never varies. Perhaps it is a daily period of reflection or study. The content matters less than the consistency. What matters is that something in your life continues regardless of outcome. This creates continuity of spirit. It keeps your mind remaining, even when the external battle ends. The third step is to study your own pattern of collapse. You already know where you fail. You have seen it happen before. The diet that ended after results appeared. The routine that dissolved after the pressure lifted. The relationship that decayed after the conflict resolved. You know exactly what you do when you believe you are safe. Name it, see it clearly, and create a specific intervention for that exact moment. When you catch yourself exhaling into release, have a practice ready. Something that brings you back to alertness before the collapse fully takes hold. This is not paranoia. It is precision. The samurai did not fear their enemies. They simply understood them well enough to remain prepared. The samurai who walked away from a duel was not the one who struck first, or fastest, or hardest. It was the one who stayed awake longest. It was the one who understood that victory is not a destination, but a continuation. It was the one who did not exhale everything the moment his blade landed. You are now standing in your own version of that moment. Perhaps you have recently achieved something. Perhaps you are in the middle of a challenge, or perhaps you are about to face one. Whatever the case, this principle will serve you in all three phases: before, during, and after. Zanshin is not a concept reserved for ancient warriors. It is a living discipline that applies to anyone who refuses to lose what they have fought for. The remaining mind does not tire because it is not fighting. It is simply awake. And that wakefulness, sustained across days and months and years, is what separates the man who builds a meaningful life from the man who briefly touches success before losing it again. You now know where most men fail. You know it is not in the battle itself, it is in the moment after. And knowing this, you no longer have the excuse of ignorance. What remains is only the question of whether you will remember, whether your mind will continue when your next victory comes. Let it find you still awake.